The world had never heard a scream before. Not thunder, not storms, not war. Just a sound that tore through the garden like lightning splitting the sky. Eve's cry. She wasn't calling a name. She wasn't praying. She was collapsing, hands shaking, knees hitting the ground beside the lifeless body of her child. Abel didn't look like he was sleeping. He looked broken, his face frozen in shock, his blood soaking into the dirt like the earth itself was drinking sorrow. And a few steps away was Cain. He wasn't standing tall, he wasn't proud, he wasn't even breathing right. He looked like a man who had been struck by something he didn't understand, something inside him he couldn't control. He stared at his hands like they belonged to a stranger. Adam rushed to Abel. Eve didn't. She looked at Cain, her firstborn son, her miracle, her promise, the one she held when she first believed God hadn't abandoned her. She whispered, "Cain, what did you do?" He didn't answer. He didn't look at her. His whole body shook. And when God appeared, not in wrath, not with lightning, but in a silence heavy enough to crush a soul, Cain finally spoke. Not with defiance, not with excuses, with fear. "My punishment, it's too much. Whoever finds me will kill me." Adam looked up sharply. "Whoever?" Eve froze. "Whoever?" God said nothing, because that one word, that single terrified word, revealed something no one in Sunday school ever dared to explain. Cain knew he was not alone. He knew there were others outside Eden. He knew the world already had people. And then, as if the mystery wasn't deep enough, the story does something strange. Almost suspicious, it says. Cain knew his wife. Just like that. No introduction, no explanation, no identity. A woman appears from the shadows of Nod. A woman the Bible treats like she was already there, waiting, watching, living in a world Adam's family never told you existed. Who was she? Why was she there? How did she know Cain was coming? And why? Why did God mark Cain? Not to punish him, but to protect him from her people? This isn't a children's story. This is a collision of worlds, a family torn apart, and a mysterious woman who might be the most important forgotten character in early Genesis. Before we unravel the truth about Cain's wife, take 1 second. Hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon to join us here on Ancient Revelations. Because what comes next will change the way you see the beginning of humanity forever. Cain didn't run. He didn't have the strength to. He walked, slow, shaking, barely breathing, away from the only home humanity had ever known. Behind him, Eve had collapsed into the dust, screaming a mother's scream, a sound so raw that even the birds fled the trees. Adam, for the first time since creation, looked older than the world itself, holding her as if he could keep her from breaking. And God turned his face away. Not out of hatred, not out of rage, but out of the unbearable sadness of watching his children destroy one another. Cain could still feel the weight of God's judgment inside his bones. It wasn't just words. It was something that clung to his soul like wet clay. "You are cursed. You will be a wanderer. You must leave." So Cain walked, and with each step, the light of Eden dimmed behind him. The warm presence that had once wrapped around him like a blanket now faded into cold emptiness. The air outside the garden felt different, heavier, darker, as if the earth itself knew what he had done. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest, trying to force his heartbeat to slow, but the images wouldn't stop. Abel's face, Abel's shock, Abel's silence. Cain stumbled forward and fell to his knees. "Brother," he whispered into the dirt. His voice broke. "Why didn't you fight me? Why did you trust me?" Tears hit the ground like tiny raindrops on parched soil. The earth didn't comfort him. It recoiled. And Cain felt it, the land rejecting him, as if creation itself refused to hold him. He dragged himself up and kept walking. But the farther he went, the more unnatural the silence became. No footsteps belonging to Adam or Eve. No voice of God calling him back. No angel guarding him. Just wind and shadows. Long, silent shadows. At first, he thought it was his imagination, grief playing tricks on his mind. But then, a twig snapped. Cain spun around, heart in his throat. Silence, then another sound, soft, distant, like someone shifting their weight. Cain staggered backward, hands shaking uncontrollably. "Who's there?" he whispered. No reply, only movement. Fast, light, human. His breath caught. He wasn't alone. His heart slammed against his ribs as realization dawned. There were people out here. People who weren't Adam. People who weren't Eve. People who weren't from Eden at all. Cain felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered God's warning. He remembered the fear in his own voice when he said, "Whoever finds me will kill me." It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was truth. Cain crouched low, his eyes scanning the trees thickening around him. Figures moved between them, not directly, but just enough for Cain to see flashes of bodies, shadows, glimpses of faces. They were studying him, testing him, watching him. Cain swallowed hard. He had never met another human besides his family. He didn't know their language, their laws, their culture, their beliefs. But the fear in their movements told him one thing. They had heard stories about Eden, whispers about the glowing beings inside the God who walked among men, the fire that guarded its gates. To them, Cain wasn't a man. He was an omen, a threat, a warning from the gods. And he could feel their fear tightening around him like a noose. Cain took a step backward, and someone gasped. A child. A tiny, frightened gasp. Cain froze in place. He turned his head slowly, very slowly, and saw small eyes peering from behind a tree. The child's mother yanked him back instantly, pulling him close as if saving him from a wild beast. Cain raised his hands, his voice cracking. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." But as the words left his mouth, he heard another voice, deep, wary, commanding. A man stepped into view, tall, built, eyes hard as flint. He wasn't from Eden. He didn't look anything like Adam. His posture wasn't curious. It was defensive, even hostile. Cain's heart hammered. These people didn't know him. They didn't know his story. They didn't know his grief. All they saw was a stranger covered in blood, stumbling out of a forbidden land. Cain lifted his hands higher. I come in peace." The man's jaw clenched. Cain's voice cracked with desperation. "I don't want to die." And then, in the most fragile moment of his life, Cain whispered a question that even he was afraid to hear himself ask. "Are you going to kill me?" The people didn't answer, but Cain could feel it. Their fear, their confusion, their unspoken judgment. He took one shaky step forward, and they all stepped back. Every single one. Children hiding behind parents, mothers clutching infants, men gripping crude weapons, stones, branches, sharpened bones. Cain had never been more afraid, not even when God confronted him, because these people didn't know God's mercy. They didn't know forgiveness. They didn't know grace. All they knew was survival. And Cain, the cursed murderer, the exile of Eden, the man marked by God, had just walked straight into their world. A world older than he realized, a world ready to judge him. A world where his name meant nothing, but his presence meant danger. And somewhere among these strangers, hidden in the land of Nod, was a woman who would change everything. A woman who didn't come from Adam's line. A woman whose existence would rewrite the story of humanity. A woman the Bible refuses to name. But she was watching Cain that day, and he did not know it yet, but she would soon become his wife. Cain stumbled through the wilderness, each step heavier than the last. His heart pounded not only from exhaustion, but from terror, the raw, unrelenting fear of the unknown. The trees of Nod were thicker, darker, their shadows weaving like fingers trying to grasp him. The wind carried whispers, too faint to understand, but loud enough to stir his soul. And then he saw them. Figures moving in the shadows. Not animals, not ghosts. Humans. People whose eyes reflected suspicion and fear, whose bodies tensed as though expecting him to strike. Cain froze. The blood on his hands, the stain of Abel's life, burned hotter than the sun. His voice caught in his throat, but he tried anyway. I am Cain, I mean no harm. Silence answered him, not a whisper, not a murmur, just eyes, hundreds of eyes watching from the dark. And then a child gasped, small, sharp, terrified. The woman stepped forward first. Cain didn't see her at first. She emerged like a shadow woven into the darkness, her presence impossible to ignore. She was not from Eden. Her hair was dark, her eyes bright, with a strange combination of fear and curiosity. She held herself with caution, yet there was something in her gaze, a spark of recognition, as though she had been waiting for him. Cain wanted to run, to hide. But exhaustion and guilt kept him rooted. The woman's voice finally broke the silence. "You're not from here." Cain swallowed hard. I'm alone. I left Eden. I have no one." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes softened, but only slightly. She didn't move closer. "You carry death with you." Cain flinched. Abel's blood still seemed to stick to his soul. I've paid for it. I've suffered for it. I seek nothing but to live." For the first time, he noticed the people behind her. A small village, hidden between the trees, watching every word, every movement. Cain realized he had walked into a civilization already older than Eden's borders, full of people who had never seen God, who had never known paradise. The woman stepped closer, cautiously, as if testing him. Cain's heart thumped. Fear, guilt, desperation, all collided. He wanted to speak, to explain himself, to beg for mercy, but words were weak against the weight of the life he had taken and the unknown he had entered. And yet, she didn't run. Hours passed. Cain and the woman spoke little, but they understood each other. Words weren't enough. Her eyes measured his sorrow, his regret, his pain. And slowly, he realized something he had not felt in his life. He was seen, truly seen. The night deepened. Shadows from the village flickered in torchlight, casting strange shapes across the forest floor. Other villagers murmured amongst themselves, curious, suspicious, fearful, but they did not approach. Only she remained near, a sentinel of this strange, hidden world. Days turned into weeks. Cain proved himself. He hunted, he labored, he survived, not as a murderer, but as a man striving for redemption in a world that didn't yet know mercy. And the woman, she began to trust him. Not fully, not without caution, but enough to speak, enough to share a fragment of her life with him, and in the silence between them, the unspoken grew louder. Cain realized she would follow him if he asked, and she understood without words that she was meant to walk beside him. The Bible tells us nothing of her name, and perhaps that is intentional, because her identity is more than a name. It is a symbol of humanity beyond Eden, a bridge between the cursed sun and the hidden world he was never meant to find. One night, beneath a canopy of stars, Cain spoke. "If I am to live, it must be with you." The woman hesitated. Her eyes glimmered with fear, but also something else. Acceptance. And so, Cain's wife became more than a shadow in the land of Nod. She became the first connection between Eden's line and the wider world, a union of fear and hope. A union that would carry forward humanity far beyond the sins of one brother, far beyond the walls of paradise. And yet, even in this fragile bond, danger lingered. The people of Nod watched. The children whispered, and Cain knew that the world outside Eden was not gentle. Every choice, every step, every trust he placed in her could ignite disaster. The land of Nod was not Eden. It was harsher, wilder, untamed, yet full of life. Cain and his wife, two humans from different worlds, stood on the edge of that strange land and looked out over the wilderness, knowing their future would be forged by blood, sweat, and the weight of a curse. Cain had walked into Nod as a fugitive, a murderer, a man marked by God, and yet in her presence, he discovered something that Eden had never given him: partnership, trust, and even a fragile hope. The days that followed were filled with struggle. They hunted together, labored together, and slowly, the small tribe that watched from the shadows began to accept him. But acceptance was fragile, and tension hung in the air like storm clouds ready to burst. Cain's wife, whose name the Bible leaves unspoken, taught him things Eden never had. How to survive without divine guidance, how to communicate with the people of Nod, how to navigate fear and suspicion, how to create life in a world that seemed designed to challenge it. And together, they began to build. A home first, then a small village. They planted crops, raised children, and slowly transformed the wild land into a place that could sustain humanity. Cain named their first city Enoch, after the first son he would raise with her. It was a name heavy with meaning: hope born from exile, life forged from tragedy. But even in creation, shadows lingered. Cain could never forget Abel, never escape the guilt that gnawed at his soul, and the people of Nod. Some whispered, some watched, and some feared. The first murder was a story that spread faster than the wheat they planted. Some called him cursed, some called him dangerous. And Cain, though building life, knew the mark on his forehead was not just a warning. It was a reminder. His wife stood by him through it all. Not naive, not blind, but courageous in ways Eden could never teach. She challenged him, questioned him, forgave him in moments where he thought forgiveness impossible, and their children, the first children born outside Eden, carried something extraordinary. They were the union of two worlds, the merging of Adam's line and the hidden people of Nod. They would grow to build, to innovate, to survive. Music, metallurgy, agriculture, these were the legacies Cain and his wife began. Life forged from exile, civilization born from pain. And yet, the ultimate question remains: who was she? Why did God leave her nameless? Perhaps because her identity was not just personal. It was symbolic, a bridge between the divine plan and the untold world beyond Eden. A reminder that humanity was always larger, stranger, and more complicated than the story we were taught Cain. Once a murderer, now became a father, a builder, a survivor. And she, his wife, his partner, the mother of a hidden line of humanity, remained the most mysterious figure of the Genesis story. Her courage, her fear, her love shaped the first city, the first generation, and the very possibility that humanity could endure beyond its first sin. The mark on Cain's forehead was still there, but it no longer felt like punishment alone. It was a warning, yes, but it was also a sign of survival, of life persevering even through tragedy. Cain's exile was no longer just a curse. It was a beginning. And in the quiet moments when Nod slept and the stars cast their light on the city of Enoch, Cain would sometimes look at his wife, and in her eyes, he saw something Eden had never given him: forgiveness, resilience, and a glimpse of hope. A civilization was rising from blood and fear, and it all began with the mysterious woman God chose not to name, the forgotten wife of Cain.